The world of tech journalism leans very heavily towards the left. That's not a new idea. That's not a surprise to anybody. The reality is the news outlets, the journalists that cover computers and software, they simply are, by and large, extremely left-leaning in their politics. But yesterday's attempted assassination of President Trump has pushed several of them into making some pretty extreme statements, including the editor-in-chief of osnews.com, who declared that there should be more attempted assassination attempts on President Trump, and he hopes that they succeed. These are tech news journalists covering the big tech industry, and they are publicly, some of them at least, hoping for successful assassination attempts of presidents and political candidates. It is insane. It is absolutely insane. I want to warn everyone a little bit ahead of time. There is at least one set of words in what we're about to talk about that gets a bit vulgar. You see on the screen a bit of censored wording right there, if you're watching the video version. I am not going to say those words out loud, but on at least one shot, I leave some of these pictures completely uncensored because they should be uncensored, because this should be a matter of public record. If you have kids watching or listening, I probably wouldn't have them watch or listen to this episode because the stuff that some of these people say is simply too grotesque, too vulgar, too hateful to subject little kids to. So I want to state that right up front. I want to back up a moment, though. I want to back up a moment because the idea that tech journalists are saying things that are hateful towards people who are right-leaning, Republicans, conservatives, President Trump in particular, is not anything new. This is common throughout almost all of the major tech news channels. Almost all. Many people see the coverage that the Lunduke Journal that I produce, and they say, Lunduke, oh, you're getting all political. Lunduke, stop covering politics, focus on the tech. And I think what many people fail to realize is that the Lunduke Journal isn't necessarily getting any more political than almost all of the other news outlets. I'm just not doing it from that same extremely hateful leftist point of view. And so me talking about the political stuff, me talking about statements made by CEOs of tech companies or creators of open source projects where they make these very, very hateful but politically charged statements, me quoting them comes across as extraordinarily political. Now, what we're going to be talking about today, it inevitably is going to feel extremely political, but what I would like to really focus on here is not the attempted assassination of the president. That's a huge topic that is going to be covered by many people far more qualified to cover it than I. What I would like to talk about is the technology journalists' reaction to it and their role leading up to it. Specifically, the tech world. The journalists, the editors of these tech publications, what were they saying leading up to it? Let's look at this a little bit here. One of the best, in my opinion, tech publications that is out there is The Register. You go to theregister.com. Now, I say the best, but while they may have some excellent coverage, they also print an awful lot of hate, a lot of hate, a huge amount of hate. The writers at The Register openly and proudly absolutely despise anyone who is not very politically left-leaning. Just as a few examples. This is an article on the recent hack of the Heritage Foundation. The Heritage Foundation was hacked by a group of individuals who described themselves, and I quote, this is not me creating these words, gay furry hackers. That is just what they call themselves. They hacked the Heritage Foundation. Now, the Heritage Foundation's been around for a very long time, conservative-leaning think tank and publication, blah, 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 blah. Well, they got hacked. It's a story. The Lunduke Journal hasn't covered it at this point simply because there's a huge amount of other news happening. But the Register covered it, and it's a major hack of a major organization. It's reasonable to cover. However, their coverage of it quickly gets extraordinarily negative towards right-leaning politics. Quote from the article, Project 2025 by the Heritage Foundation is a lengthy and fairly detailed blueprint that outlines how a future conservative president, such as, say, Donald Trump, should he win the election again, could overhaul the federal government and public policy to enact a far-right agenda and give huge powers to the executive branch. Scrolling down a little bit, the Christo-fascist wish list, that's their words, includes many, many things, and then they go on to state a huge number of things in as many negative terms as they possibly can. And this is a common theme throughout the Register's coverage. Even when covering something that is like a major hack or a major lawsuit relating to tech companies, they immediately take an extreme stance of painting whoever is right-leaning as evil, right? Doesn't matter if the person being sued or doing the suing is right-leaning. Doesn't matter what the rest of the idea is. As long as there is someone involved that is right-leaning, they get painted as evil, or in this case, the Christo-fascists, as they put it. There's many articles here about President Trump having interactions with, say, David Zuckerberg or many other people, and in every instance they always take the side of whoever is not Trump or whoever is not right-leaning, and the particulars of the individual story really don't matter. A great example is this particular lawsuit. There's a lawsuit against IBM. Based in part on coverage that came out of the Lunduke Journal about IBM discriminating against one of their former employees in a rather extreme way. And of course, the Lunduke Journal covered it and eventually forced the Register to finally cover it. But when the Register finally did cover literally IBM discriminating against an employee on multiple grounds with an extreme amount of evidence, instead of focusing on the lawsuit, what the lawsuit could mean for the company or the tech industry, journalism-y stuff, they pivoted, and the majority of the article was about people involved in the law firm, how those people might have ties to Trump, and therefore they're very, very bad people. So anyone suing IBM, if they have ties to Trump in any way, they play 6 degrees of Trump here, right? It's like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, except 6 degrees of Trump. And if you have 6 degrees of Trump connectedness, you're instantly evil. You can go and read all these articles. If you just go to the Register and search for Trump, the articles that you find are just profoundly, profoundly negative. And it's not like they're the only ones out there. And one of my favorite examples is Gizmodo, because they're probably the most blatant about it. Now, Gizmodo, if you've been around the tech world long enough, they are the gadget blog. That was always their claim to fame, is they cover gadgetry. And of course, anything that dovetails into gadgetry, right? Handhelds or cool computer stuff or any sort of electronics, hardware, software stuff that touches on gadgetry in some way. They're the gadget blog. Well, Gizmodo, if you search for Trump, in their little article search mechanism, you will find thousands of articles, and almost none of them, almost none, have anything to do with technology in any way, right? Not even tangentially. Not a company is sued, not possible technology or surveillance laws or policies. No. It's just they get mad at Donald Trump and they scream about him. Often huge amounts of vulgarity and swearing, calling him Nazis and fascists, and basically talking about how he's a threat to all of us and he's a convicted felon and he's coming for your kids and he's gonna kill everybody. Like he's painted as the most evil guy possible. Let me see if I can scroll up here so you can see. Oh man, it just goes on and on. 2,240 articles about Donald Trump on Gizmodo, and it's all extraordinarily negative. Much of it is just kind of outlandish and wild conspiracy theories. A lot of it is just rants, crazy, angry, fueled rants about Donald Trump. It's off the charts, right? And so leading up to where we are at now, the tech journalism world, by and large, has fed into this. The hatred against Donald Trump that we see right now, they've pushed it. They've pushed this as a narrative. Even the tech news outlets that have been the most focused on the tech have done this to a certain degree. There are a few that haven't, and God bless them for staying out of the politics entirely, but most have gone down this route. And this is not, and let's get into a few specific examples of things that happened after the assassination attempt. But these are not isolated incidents. In fact, if we wanted to, we could have a 5-hour-long show right now of just me reading to you examples from nearly every major political or nearly every major tech outlet specifically writing articles about how politically Donald Trump is bad, right? And they don't do this about left-wing politicians, right? It's just right-wing politicians, specifically Trump. Now, after the shooting, after the attempted assassination of President Trump, immediately many tech news pundits, right? People who were YouTubers and podcasters and PR people and spokespersons for tech foundations and outlets quickly took to various social media platforms, Twitter and Mastodon and Facebook and everything else, to say some pretty awful things. We're not going to get into a lot of those right now. Many of them are pretty easy to search for and you can go find them yourself. I want to talk about a few key examples and then we're going to get into the OS News guy. But right now, what you're seeing on your screen in front of you, if you are watching the video version of this show, is a Mastodon post. And oh my gosh, if you want to find horrible, angry stuff that's just filled to the brim with hate and a desire and a thirst for blood, go to Mastodon. The Fediverse, as it is known, is just one of the most awful places on planet Earth. It's so hateful. But if you go over there right now, you'll find a post from a gentleman named Jason Evangelo. Jason Evangelo is basically the spokesperson for Mozilla Firebird. And Mozilla is the big foundation and mega corporation that creates the Firefox web browser, but they also create Thunderbird. Thunderbird is a long-standing email client, a good piece of software, which he is one of the main people behind. He is an employee of Mozilla Thunderbird. He is their marketing person and public spokesperson and all this sort of thing. So a public spokesperson, right? A public-facing official within Mozilla, which has a long-standing history, I should point out, of seeking to censor all right-wing people. So Mozilla, the people behind Firefox, they have a stated policy and a stated goal, a long-term goal of, quote, doing more than deplatforming of anyone who is right-wing. So anyone with conservative ideals, Republicans, Donald Trump, etc., their goal is to do more than deplatforming, meaning annihilate them off the internet. That's their stated goal, is to make sure they are not allowed to be online, because deplatforming means you are not allowed on a platform. So deplatforming means Donald Trump was banned from Twitter. That is deplatforming him from Twitter. And Mozilla was a big supporter of taking that step when Donald Trump was removed from Twitter. And they think that it should go further than that. Well, what's further than that? Being removed from the entire internet. So Mozilla thinks that anyone who is conservative should not be allowed to be online. Well, here is a Mozilla representative stating the following. I'm going to read it to you exactly. Quote, "This Trump shooting feels staged. The crowd reaction, people who were right behind him, is just off. These are not terrified people. These are mildly curious people at best. Some of the dudes who were right behind him look like they're watching a sports event. Something's not right. Or is this just how Americans act during shootings now? Jesus, frowny face." So there we have the spokesperson from Mozilla saying that the people who were being murdered behind Trump were just, mildly curious, hanging out, not at all scared. They're just watching a sporting event, and the whole thing was probably staged. Yeah, this is not an uncommon thing. Now, I pointed this out. I hopped on Twitter and I sent a note over to Mozilla, and I'm like, seriously? This is your representative. This is your representative. This is what you want forward? And a couple of hours later, Jason Evangelo, after I brought this up to Mozilla and made a little public stink about it over on Twitter, which got a lot of attention, stated the following. Quote, "I broke my own long-standing rule by discussing politics on here yesterday and jumped to some assumptions that shouldn't have been posted. I want to apologize for that. I was angry, shocked, and in a state of disbelief. Back to our regularly scheduled programming." So clearly he was forced to apologize for stating that. But you'll note he didn't apologize for the things he said. He apologized that he said them, right? He didn't say, "Oh, no, this wasn't staged." He didn't say, "Oh, my apologies for saying it was staged." He just said he shouldn't have posted those thoughts. Creepy. It also lets you know exactly where these people stand. Another example I want to point out, because this is someone I know personally, Gardner Bryant, who has been a long-term YouTuber, who's focused on things like Linux and Linux gaming. In fact, he used to be called the Linux Gamer. He focuses on Steam Deck gaming and all sorts of stuff. Posted the following over on Twitter. "The FBI must investigate the supposed Trump attack. Everything about it is fishy, and I don't believe it for a second. This man was on WWE, World Wrestling Enterprise, for FFS, for beep's sake. Him and his wrestling buddies just call this getting color. Feels staged." Oh, my heavens. I reached out to Gardner, asked him, what the heck, and he did not get back to me. Again, this is not an unusual or abnormal response. Once again, we could sit here and go through Twitter statements and Mastodon statements and social media posts from all sorts of people throughout the tech industry, YouTubers and podcasters and whatnot, saying some pretty awful stuff along these lines. But I want to focus on one of the worst. And apologies for the swear word that's on the screen right now, again, for those watching the video version. This is the gentleman who runs osnews.com, which theoretically is about operating system news, but covers general tech and whatnot as well. Tom Halwerda, who is the editor over there and primary author of everything on osnews.com. He says, quote, "Welp, this will probably seal him the win." He posted this right after a couple hours after the assassination attempt. Quote, "Had to beeping miss. Ugh." It was then responded to by another individual in the tech industry who said, "Or it'll make someone else brave enough to try again." To which Tom, the editor of osnews.com, says, quote, "Let's hope so." These are tech journalists. This is a tech journalist publicly, vocally, and unambiguously hoping for the murder and assassination of a former president and current presidential candidate that he doesn't particularly agree with. This is insane. This is awful. This is insane. These people are awful. Awful. Oh my word. What in the... I'm trying to censor myself right now, because while there's a naughty word on the screen, I don't want to start swearing into the microphone. But it's important to know. The reason I bring this up is that it's important to know. This is osnews.com, by the way. This is the website that he writes for, which is currently advertising STD testing. Golly, you can't make that up. It's important to know where the journalists stand, because all journalists have their own particular viewpoints, their own particular biases, their own particular feelings, right? I do, and I don't hide them in the slightest. And clearly, to the OS News writer's credit, he doesn't really hide his particular views either. So I'm sure he will be fine and happy with me telling people that he says these sorts of things. And this isn't like a one-off. This wasn't he was wrapped up in the moment and said something truly horrendous and unforgivable. This is stuff he posts on an almost daily basis. It's just nonstop hate and vitriol and violence preaching and just awful, vulgar stuff. Awful, just awful. But he's not alone. I think it's important that we really look at this. Over the last several years, most of tech news, from the Register to Gizmodo and on, have been pushing hate, right? They've been selling hate. That hasn't even been related to what they core do, right? That's why I wanted to point out that at least in the Register's case, there weren't a lot of articles that were purely about Donald Trump hate. They just managed to find ways to slide it in. They're like, okay, we'll do an article about a lawsuit against Red Hat or a lawsuit against IBM. Well, let's see, if we play 6 Degrees of Donald Trump with a guy that works for this law firm, and then he knows a guy, and then he knows Donald Trump. Now we can just talk about Donald Trump for 3 pages instead of focusing on the article. But at least in the Register's case, it all starts from their covering tech, which at least that's better. Like in Gizmodo's case, it's thousands upon thousands of articles just preaching hate, advocating for violence, dehumanizing and vilifying Donald Trump, seemingly to push towards an end where people don't view Donald Trump as human and feel like he is an existential threat that must be murdered. You go on social media right now and you see still people throughout every corner of every industry. You see the guy who played Sulu on Star Trek and everyone else preaching even today, 24 hours after an assassination attempt, about how Donald Trump is an existential threat and must be eliminated, right? It's like, holy heavens. And the fact that this is happening within tech journalism, it really tells you mountains about what these particular peoples think, what they believe, what their goals are, and it has a direct impact on the type of coverage we get. This is why the Lunduke Journal needs to cover these things, right? It needs to be pointed out. We need to be pointing out that the Register is printing this vile filth, that Gizmodo is apparently dedicated to nothing but vile filth. OS News, that is supposedly there just to write cool articles about operating systems, just is just pushing and advocating for the literal murder of people. Like it's off the charts. It's crazy. And you'll notice I'm not even exaggerating anything here. I'm just reading from them and telling you their words and believing them when they say things. Now, I would hope that in the immediate hours, especially after an assassination attempt of a political leader, people could stop for a second and stop advocating for more hate of that political leader, advocating that political leader needs to be taken out and murdered. But they don't. They don't stop for even a moment. In fact, many of these leftist journalists and leftist talking heads use that moment to preach even more hate, to escalate it even further. It is wild. It is absolutely wild. I truly don't understand. I don't understand where their head is at. It doesn't make sense to me. No matter how much you dislike a political leader, no matter how on the opposite side of the political spectrum he is or from you, in the moments after that person gets shot in the head and other people get murdered during the assassination attempt, to go, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to hop online and tell people how upset I am that he missed, that he didn't hit him square in the head and kill him. And I'm going to advocate that more people do that. More people go try and kill him. That's what I'm going to do. How insane do you have to be? What a vile monster do you have to be to do that? It's horrific. It's absolutely horrific. And this is the tech news industry. This is the whole gosh darn industry. There are many tech journalists that are staying more or less quiet about this. Smart. We know that the majority of them are extremely left-leaning. Extremely. But at least some of them are staying quiet about this. At least some of them have the common decency and common sense to keep their head down right now. To not be running around mouthing off about how they hope for more murder attempts. But not this guy. Not this guy. Not public representatives from Mozilla, that's for sure. And not a huge number of podcasters and YouTubers and a number of other writers as well. It's pretty awful. Now, because we're heading into yet another politically charged week, it will be interesting to see what the tech news outlets do with that. My guess is you'll see a huge amount of extraordinarily heated, extraordinarily vicious coverage on the tech news sites, the sites that cover computers and software, about Republicans and Trump. Because the Republican convention is this week, and the assassination attempt happened. Some of them are gonna dial it up to 11. I would hope that the smart ones would ignore the politics and focus on just covering the tech. Now, at the Lunduke Journal, I have to cover all of it. Right? I have to, when these tech journalists come out and they start preaching for the murder of, when tech journalists preach for the murder of politicians, I have to cover it. I have to, because none of the other tech news outlets will. None of the other tech news outlets will hold themselves or each other accountable. And someone has to, darn it. And again, sorry for posting, for showing you the imagery that has some vulgarity in it, ladies and gentlemen. I felt like it was such an extreme thing that it had to be put up on the screen. Now, this individual is not in the United States. I think that's worth pointing out, that this individual is not in the United States, and so otherwise, he'd be getting a knock on his door right now. But he's not in the United States, so he can preach his hate from another country. I doubt anything bad will happen to him. Other than, I'm going to say this flat out, any companies that start advertising with OS News, I'm going to make that known. I'm going to make that known that this is what you support. Unbelievable. Absolutely insane. All right. Yuck. I hate that this stuff has to be covered. I hate it. I absolutely hate it. I just want to spend this week talking about, open source DOS clones. If I could spend the week talking about open source DOS clones and weird BSD forks, that would just be joyous for me. But this has to be covered. We have to know about this stuff. It has to be. The sunlight is the best disinfectant. And when people are doing this horrible stuff, it has to be, the spotlight has to be put on it, and I'm going to keep doing it. Thank you to everyone who supports the Lunduke Journal, by the way. Lunduke.com, lunduke.locals.com. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerds and nerdettes across the inner tube, I do declare and broadcast.